Hey guys, exams are finally over, so I can start recording more frequently and posting more videos. Without further ado, let's just get into today's video. So I wanted to take today to start kind of a new series on my channel about astrophysics. Astrophysics is the field that I personally am most interested in, so I decided, might as well take some time, share why I like astrophysics, what is astrophysics for those who are questioning if they want to maybe go into a field like astrophysics, stuff like that. So, obviously, the first most basic question is, what is astrophysics? I think astrophysics, at its most basic, is kind of the study of science of just stuff in space. So, this is including but not limited to things like stars, galaxies, planets, but it also includes things like, how did the universe start? How will it evolve? How will it end? Those are some of the problems that astrophysics solves, but astrophysics itself is mainly just a science that kind of explores objects out in space, how they move, how they work, why they form, stuff like that. The next one is a continuation of that question of what problems do astrophysics solve. So I just mentioned a couple. How did the universe start? How will it end? How will it evolve? But there's also things such like, how did life come about? So I think those questions really are the most basic questions that humans ask. And, I think any field that tries to give those questions a concrete answer is definitely one of the more important fields. It gets at the questions that drive human beings. Another thing you'll hear many people ask is like, why do we care about astrophysics? Why is it important? And I just said one reason, right? It drives at the most basic human question of how did we get here? Why are we here? But astrophysics also helps us down on Earth, even when it's not about, why are we here? It also helps us with things like GPS. Things like GPS require, sufficient physics knowledge, because even if you did have the engineering tenacity and you were able to get a satellite in orbit, right, because of the effects of special relativity, the satellite will, the GPS readings will always stray 40 kilometers off every single day, and it'll get worse and worse. So it's almost entirely useless if you don't have the knowledge and like the physics that comes with like astrophysics and just physics research. Getting to a more lighthearted question, why do I like astrophysics? I like astrophysics for three main reasons. One, it's very difficult. I personally like myself a challenge. I don't want to go into a field that'll be easy. I want to make I want to do something that is, rigorous, it's engaging, something hard, right? Number two, it involves physics, and I've always been interested in physics because, I believe that the world is kind of determinate, right? So if you know the starting conditions and you know how the world works, then you can know the ending conditions, right? And I think that kind of vision to the future, quote unquote, is very interesting. I think everyone, when, back when they were a kid and everyone asked, like, what powers do you want to have? There's a good amount of physicists. I'd probably bargain that most physicists are going to be the kids who are like, I want to see into the future, right? And physics is kind of a way to get there. Obviously, it's not perfect, but it's kind of a step towards that goal. Number three, my third reason why I like astrophysics is I personally have just always been interested in things in space, right? I mean, my series before this is all about aerospace engineering. How do we build rockets? How do we get to space? So I think space has always just intrigued me. And, if space intrigues me, then obviously, like, the field that I'm going to be most interested in studying stuff about space, right? Like, what makes up space, why, things form in space, all that type of stuff. Astrophysics all answers that. So, I think it just logically follows that if I like space, I'm going to like astro, right? Who are a couple of my favorite astrophysicists? Obviously, well, not obviously, but there's two that immediately come to mind, those being Chandrasekhar and Stephen Hawking. Chandrasekhar is very famous on his work with the Chandrasekhar limit, which is essentially, after like a main sequence star dies, sometimes it'll turn into a white dwarf, which is kind of held up by degeneracy pressure. But if a white dwarf achieves too high of a mass, it will implode, right? So the limit that the white dwarf implodes at is called the Chandrasekhar limit. And, I think that's a really cool finding that he found, because it kind of gives you a standardized measurement that can go across the universe, and I can talk about that later in the videos when I talk about like distance measurements in the universe. Another very famous one that pops into mind is Stephen Hawking. You guys have all heard of him. No need to introduce him. On his work about black holes and Hawking radiation and how black holes can slowly evaporate over time. I personally am not smart enough to understand any of that yet, but I do think it's very interesting, and conceptually it kind of, it intrigues me. Black holes intrigue everyone, right? But, obviously some notable mentions that they're not strictly astrophysics, they're not strictly astrophysics discoveries, but they are very important. People like Maxwell, Einstein, and Newton. Maxwell, obviously, because without him, we don't understand how light works, right? He's very important. Einstein for his work in general and special relativity, all that stuff. And Newton for basically but making very big strides into scientifically understanding how the world works, right? Because there was no scientific basis before him, or no proper scientific basis before him. So he's obviously one of the giants in scientific discovery, as he kind of made the system on his own. Then there's a lot of fields in astrophysics, but I think my three favorite ones are stellar evolution, planetary movements, and spectroscopy. I think stellar evolution is pretty obvious what that entails. Kind of understanding how stars form, how they evolve, how they die, what happens when they die, what do they turn into, right? So, more specific, that talks about stuff like heliophysics is part of stellar evolution, right? Understanding how things in the sun work, understanding what, coronal mass ejections are, sunspots, just how does a star work in general. All that stuff is encompassed under stellar evolution, and I think it's probably one of the more interesting fields in my opinion. Spectroscopy is a field that's been getting a lot of attention recently, especially with James Webb being launched. But spectroscopy kind of talks about getting the light from a distant object, and from the light you're able to tell what the material composition is of that object. So, for example, like hydrogen has a very specific line, a red line in it, in its spectral line, that when you see it, you know that there was hydrogen in that object, right? So I think being able to get that light and kind of dismantle the object into whatever its constituents are, like exactly what it's made out of, I think that's really fascinating, and I'm excited to see where that field goes by the time I'm able to get my hands into it. Another one is planetary movements. Planetary movements, it starts simple with, Newton's laws of motion. Most of you guys, if you've taken like a high school physics course, you've probably done gravitation, orbital mechanics with Kepler's first, second and third laws. But it'll also get a lot more complicated from there, because, general relativity starts to play an effect in planetary movements. For example, like Mercury. The orbit of Mercury actually slowly turns around the sun, like the orbit itself, not just Mercury, right? And we knew for some of the reasons why it turned, but there was always a small portion of it which was unaccounted for, and only when Einstein made the theory about general relativity was that portion ever accounted for. So I think, planetary motions in general is a very interesting field. It's quite important as well, because the things you learn in planetary movements can be kind of not generalized, but they can be applied to things like asteroids, and knowing when an asteroid's going to hit Earth is pretty important. And then the last two, spectroscopy and planetary movements, they kind of conjoined with a couple other fields and turned to this field about studying exoplanets. So, an exoplanet is obviously a planet not in our solar system, but in another solar system. And a lot of the main study of exoplanets is on, can they support life, right? Because for our knowledge, all we know is that we are the only life form. Personally, I don't believe we are, but it's possible. And I think the study of trying to find life is a valuable study. I'm not sure if I'll get super involved with exoplanets, but I'm trying to get involved with as many fields as I find interesting as possible. So I hope this short 10-minute video helped maybe give some aspiring astrophysics students some things to think on. Some of the fields in astrophysics. What is astrophysics? Just kind of give everyone an introduction on astrophysics and why I like it. So yeah, I will. I'm not entirely sure if I'm going to make the next video aerospace or astrophysics. Kind of just comes and goes, whichever one I'm going to record for that day. But I'll see you in the next one. Later.